Welcome to the program Leadership Perspectives, a forum, a platform where we discuss all things, everything related to leadership. And today we are going to look at the concept of leadership from the point of view of an industry captain, or MD or a CEO. How the role has evolved, what are the growing challenges, and how to really inspire highly disoriented, confused labor force. And to discuss that, we have a special guest with us, who is no stranger to Sri Lankan corporate fraternity. He is the current chairman of Next Campus, and formerly he is the MD CEO of Sri Lanka, and also have worked across several multinationals, including Ceylon Tobacco, as well as Coca-Cola. I would say about 25 years plus experience. He's Dusty Alahakoon. Dusty, thank you very much for coming for the program.
Thank you, Manik, for having me.
Let's just put into context and set the platform in terms of identify what the concept of leadership is. Dusty, if you can really if you can recall over 20 years of being in the space, someone who has been working as a leader during the 90s or 80s, how do you see the role has evolved when you consider the expectations, the KPIs that is expected of a CEO or managing companies today? Has the role evolved, or has it expanded? Has it been narrowed down? Or because there are so many different labor force generations have emerged over the period. So what's your take on that?
Yes, Manik, I think as you correctly said, we are crossing few generations, those boundaries in the last few decades. And if you see that, the nature or the role of leadership has certainly changed, because we were managing a different generation in the 90s or the early 2000s. But if you look at today, the millennials and the C generation, how you manage them is quite different to what we did before.
Right.
So at a time, I think transactional leadership, dealing with someone on a transactional basis worked quite well, but the needs of employees, needs of organizations have changed today, and also the challenges have changed, and they have become much more complex over the time.
Okay.
So now what you need is more transformational leadership, because one reason is the challenges have changed, the complexity has changed, and at the same time, the people who come to work, the generations have changed.
I would say the value systems all have changed.
Definitely.
Right.
I would say that's the big shift that I have seen in this
right. So in
few
that
decades.
sense, the KPIs and the expectations are much more wider. It has probably grown, if I am to say, put it into context.
I think it has become much more complex.
An integrated kind of thing, yeah.
Yeah, and it has become much more complex, much more challenging. Okay. It is not a straight line anymore that we had some time ago, but it's something that you need to look at holistically.
Right. Linked to that question, if you really look at, especially in economies like Sri Lanka, with the recent disruptions of COVID 2019 and 2020, and before that as well, do you feel that the Sri Lankan leadership or Sri Lankan companies mostly are they reactive, or they are submissive, or they are trying to play catch up when something happens, or are they really resilient and kind of extrapolate the future and anticipate what's in store and looking at what are the possible red flags, and then proactively, instead of being reactively, engage with certain market demands or crisis situations? What's your take on that?
I think, Manik, in that case, I would say it's a mixed bag, because we have some very successful companies, both multinationals and local companies, who are doing very well, who are reading the market well, and who's taking this leadership challenge to the next level, getting the right type of leaders. At the same time, there is the average lot, and there are some companies who are struggling or suffering. So it's a mixed bag, if you think.
Right.
And it's not a Sri Lankan phenomena, but it's a global thing where the companies who take this leadership challenge seriously and be ahead of the game, who can build that intuition or reading the market faster, always wins.
Okay.
So that's my response to that.
Right. Excellent answer. You mentioned about this is exactly the third question. You also touched upon quite rightly the differentiation between transactional and transformational leadership, which brings to my third question. Now, we all like to be in the space of being a transformational leader. Now, but it requires a lot of self-realization, self-consciousness, so many different aspects that come into that kind of mindset. Why do you think that in certain organizations, I'm not talking about small tier, even mid-tier to higher level, you still find, I have experienced myself in my career as well, you still find the leadership have that transactional mentality. My question is, Dusty, is that why people still, leadership still stick on to that kind of transactional mindset? Is it something to do with incapacity to, allocate autonomy, or whether it is something to do with your insecurities, or whether the structures are not in place? Why do you think that people still continue to be in a very technical operational mindset as opposed to looking at the next big idea and to stay ahead of the curve? What's your take on that?
Yes, I think you touched upon few key words there. I think the most important key word there is mindset. It starts with that. There is a place for transactional leadership, of course, and there is a evolving bigger scope for transformational leadership. That's for sure. But how can one progress from one mentality, one mindset to the other? And when we talk about transformational leadership, we can talk about 3 blocks: personal transformation, team transformation, and organizational transformation. So unless a leader goes through personal transformation first, he or she is unlikely to perform as a transformational leader towards his or her team or the entire organization. Okay. So the main ingredient is, whatever age that you are, whatever stage that you are in life, how do you go through a personal transformation to embrace this mindset?
Right, okay.
And convince yourself, I need to change first before I change anyone else.
Right. So you have to start asking the right hard questions yourself in terms of whether you are rightly wired to the market demands, yeah?
Yes.
And also the culture.
And it's really looking at a mirror and looking at yourself and doing a self-assessment and understanding what areas should I change?
Right.
How do I become a transformational leader?
Right.
Because as you said, most people try to embrace this word and try to be a leader, but you haven't transformed.
Right.
Right? So it starts with you.
Yes, sir. Excellent answer. Getting back to or linking to that question, also there is this concept of, I think it's emerged somewhere around the early 90s, and now it's kind of part of the leadership literacy. This word called inclusivity. There's called inclusive leadership. Now, different generations have different connotations attached to that kind of word. But if you look at inclusivity-based leadership today, what constitutes that, and how important it is, the concept of inclusivity in today's context?
Yes, this word inclusivity means how open are you, and it comes from a place of vulnerability,
right,
which is completely different to the transactional or very authoritarian leadership style,
right,
where you think, I know all the answers,
right,
I have all the solutions.
I'm the smartest person around.
Exactly, and I will tell what to do,
right,
others will have to execute.
Right.
Now, that kind of model works very well when the environment is predictable,
Okay.
when the environment is less complex.
Right.
things are easy.
Right.
One person can be at the center and he or she can dictate the decisions. But if you look at, as you mentioned, the last couple of years have taken a permanent shift in the way we do things, personally as well as professionally, and in the whole macro environment things have taken a massive shift. And as we speak, these shifting and changes are becoming even more than last week, last month or last year.
Right.
Now in that complex environment, we typically call this a VUCA world. Right? In this VUCA world, you need to be vulnerable, and also you need to accept you don't have all the answers. There are smarter people out there. There are different people out there who will see problems in a different angle. So the idea is, how do you harvest this diversity?
Right.
How do you harvest this diversity and make it inclusive so that we can come up with better solutions and better decisions? Because always a collective team is, a cohesive team is much better than one person.
So what I'm saying is, at times we are all human, so we are subject to error, and it's okay to show some vulnerabilities, that there can be areas that you are also not 100% confident, within the boundaries of course, and that shows that people can trust you, that you are one of them kind of thing. Is that something which what you touch upon? Yeah.
Yes, Manik, because being vulnerable means you have a very good sense of yourself, and you know what are my strong points, what are my blind spots, what are my weaker areas, and you're comfortable with yourself. So it's very easy to be authentic and tell people, look, this is who I am, and I am leading this with a bigger team, with a bigger workforce. But they have a role to play in the bigger journey. It's not that I dictate all the decisions.
You interestingly point out this word called cohesiveness, so absolutely collectivity is much greater. So that gets me to the fourth question. It's about critical feedback. Now that's another area leadership needs to be mindful of, which is also linked to the previous question. How to embrace different ideas. Now we can call it as constructive feedback. When it comes to your style of leadership, how do you really go about engaging constructive feedback? So if one of your employees or direct reports come to you and say, you know what, this is not the exact way, there can be other ways. It's constructive feedback. So how do you really, what's your style has been right throughout your career?
I think when you talk about that new model of transformational leadership, it is about having good conversations, but at the same time having hard conversations also. So in modern leadership, giving feedback and getting feedback are both equally important.
Right.
But Manik, I would say sometimes the way we choose to give feedback, or sometimes the way we choose to get feedback, timing can be different.
Right, okay.
For example, we have a saying called strike when the iron is hot.
Right.
But I believe you need to strike when people are cold or the situation is neutral. Okay. You can never give or get feedback if you're angry, if you're emotional, if you are in a different mental state.
Emotions clouds judgment and that kind of thing as well.
Yes, and most often your natural defenses kick in, and denial and that type of emotions come out at the wrong time. So the best way to give feedback is during neutral times, when the other person is not threatened by the situation. For example, our typical performance management systems sometimes dictate to give feedback at a performance discussion, meeting. But that time sometimes employees may think, okay, I'm getting this feedback so that my rating might be downgraded in a defensive place. But there are so many other neutral, genuine instances where you can give feedback and have a discussion around it. I think that is the model that I have used, and which is much more effective than having these conversations.
Because he finds that it's not criticizing, it's basically knowledge sharing. That is part of the negotiation. That is all this progressive kind of mentality that kicks in, right? That kind of two-way communication.
Yes, and in fact, you're genuinely helping that person, and that's where coaching also becomes a part of transformational leadership, because you have an interest on that person and you want to genuinely make a change.
Right. Okay. Excellent answer. Another very important kind of concept when it comes to leadership is how you really measure leadership success. Now, a lot of people associate so many different things. It has actually been pretty vague in terms of how you define a great leader. Some will associate, okay, someone can communicate well, is a great leader, which is probably not the best of interpretations. Some might say through ranking, hierarchical structure, where do you sit on the food chain? Based on the higher you go, you are a great leader. So, and also sometimes you find that leadership, is it about the impact to the organization, or probably when you exit the void that you created, okay, that shows that he has really contributed to the organization, or is it numbers related? For example, sometimes I find that certain sometimes the leaders or CEOs, you find that just natural organic growth of the industry, they attribute to their success, but they have not really contributed the strategic, any support or inspired people. So there are so many things that people are confused in terms of associating what leadership really, how we measure leadership. What's your take on that? How do you measure leadership?
Yes, I think in your question itself there are so many answers to that. And if we look at one more word for leadership, I would say it's influence. Leadership means influence. The question is, what type of influence have you made to that organization or to that team or to that environment that you were? And we can't take a narrow perspective and say results are good. As you said, sometimes the organic growth in the market itself can be very good and can be deceiving.
Good on the CV's
deceiving.
Resume.
Yeah. So I would say to take a much more wider perspective of the influence he or she had on the team, in the organization, as a role model, is a measure of what leadership has been, and it's a collective measure. And you also mentioned the void you leave behind. In fact, if you're a good leader, there shouldn't be a void when you move out.
Absolutely, good
because you have created that succession and you have made people ready, and your exit or your departure is not felt by the organization.
Smooth transition.
It's a very smooth transition, and the organization and the team prosper even after you leave. So these are the kind of measures that you need to look at from a more holistic perspective.
Okay. Just you have worked, I think, over 20 plus years, so quite a lot of experience in the leadership space. What's your biggest leadership lesson? That a lesson where you probably would have just a one-off wow moment, a heroic moment, that's a sudden realization, or could be over a period of time, which has got kind of hardwired into you. You know what, irrespective of the change of landscape or industry, you feel that, you know what, this is going to be my modus operandi, or it's going to influence the way I do work. Is there anything that you could share with us?
Okay, Manik, I think a very interesting question. I don't have a aha moment or a wow moment in that. But I think if I look at my collective wisdom or collective experience that I've had, I feel as a leader you have to be nimble and agile. Why I say that is, the only constant is change. And compared to our parents' time, there was change, But now change is exponential, changing so fast. What our parents went through over a lifetime, we go through over a couple of years or 5 years. So how do you handle that as a leader, and how do you stay relevant to the environment? I think that's my lesson really. If you become rigid and if you become more set in your ways, you'll never be able to adapt to that environment.
I think your key word is to stay relevant. So that's requires by default you need to change yourself to the changing environment. Excellent. If I have to ask your team members or people who work with you, what are the special expressions or habits? This can be bad habits, annoying habits, or it can be just quirks where he carries his cup on his left hand, he keep it right, and or he will ask you questions before you sit down, or certain things which identify you as Dusty, or he's like that. This is his ritual. This is habit. It doesn't change. It just without knowing subconsciously you that. Is there anything like that that you might want to share, which people think, okay, that's Dusty?
Well, at a certain time I tried to be a perfectionist, but that didn't work out because it created a lot of stress for me and the team. So some might remember me that way. But if you look at my recent past, I have been quite casual and easygoing, giving a voice to the team. And sometimes I would have come out as more indecisive at some times.
That's okay.
But that is for me to have some space and to think and make a more informed and a democratic call.
Right. Okay.
Than taking my own calls. Well, if I look at anything that's funny, I think I've been pretty easygoing and I don't take life too seriously.
More relaxed.
Yeah. Yes, I would say that.
Okay. One before the last question, I want to just ask you very quickly the recent developments of COVID 2019 and 22, how it has transformed the way we view, for one is leadership role as well as organizational strategy in terms of so many disruptions. You touched upon that quite a lot earlier as well, but what's your message to people who are in senior leadership positions? This is a wake-up call, is great red flags. What sort of message that you might want to share with your own expertise?
I think my take on it is that the last 2 years has made a permanent shift, and the repercussions or the consequences of that will be felt for many more years. That means there will be a lot of change. On one side, the digital transformation has accelerated really, and what could have happened 5 years, 10 years down the line is happening now, starting now. On the other side, we see many human challenges. People are talking about the great resignation. People are thinking, re-evaluating their lives and thinking, how should I work? Do I want to have a hybrid working model? Should I work part-time? Should I do freelancing? They are all evaluating their life in a very different way than they did a couple of years ago. Now, this brings immense amount of challenges and responsibilities to the organization and leadership. So the cookie cutter model will not work.
That's right. Okay.
Right? And you need to think differently. And this is where self-awareness, understanding yourself, being value-based, and truly engaging with your team is more important than ever before to meet these challenges. And this constant reskilling, upskilling yourself, being open to what's happening out there is very important for organizations. But unfortunately, many of us want to get back to where we were. That's our comfort zone. But the real magic will happen in the learning zone and the growth zone, where we need to mentally move to. And when you think of this change, especially, change happens outside and change happens very fast. but the transition that people go through, humans go through, is slow, emotional, experiential. Takes time. So unless you really appreciate these two, you will never be able to handle change programs successfully. So today leaders, they would have been technically super, doing some very good results, but without understanding the hearts and minds of the people, will be very difficult to lead organizations.
As you mentioned, the great resignation, I think they are evaluating the quality of life, I think. Works around work as well as quality, the balance, how you integrate the two. Excellent. This comes to my final question, which I usually ask every single interview. That's where there are 4 C's, which is consciousness, is about self-awareness, how we are wired, the beliefs, the value systems, your ethics, and also to drive a great organization culture, the culture itself, how you do a positive culture or with the right values, capacity, encouraging people to fail, positive vibes, and also an innovative culture. And also the third factor is how we really connect with people. The third C, it goes way beyond the communication, how we really engage, create empathy through emotional intelligence, and also finally the usual suspects of the normal competencies of problem solving, negotiation. So out of that, I asked Dusty to really pick in terms of everything is important, but in terms of priority wise, what do you think out of the 4 C's that you would want to really look at as the most important?
Yes, Manik, I think 4 C's are equally important. But if you ask me what I'm passionate about, I would pick the first one, being conscious. And I would say this whole big journey, everyone's talking about how do we transform the organization, how do we transform teams, but it all starts with you. How do you transform yourself? Right? What is the new you that you want to have? And that brings a lot of hard work, lot of difficult moments to reconcile with yourself. And today leaders need to really reconcile with yourself, understand you, be conscious about what do you feel. A lot of people ask, what are you thinking? But very few people ask, what do you feel?
Absolutely.
Right? So you need to feel that first and transform yourself before you transform others.
And that will get a greater buy-in as well from them as well.
That's where the role modeling of leaders are so important. If the leader is role modeling, others find it very easy to follow, take that as an example. So I feel consciousness is a very important factor, and being the first C is very appropriate because that's a starting point.
Absolutely. Well, folks, that's all the time we have. Dusty, it has been my pleasure. Thank you very much for coming on this program, share your insight. Well, so if anyone who is taking up leadership position or already in the leadership space, I'm sure what we discussed, I hope that it has provided some insight in terms of revisiting some of your leadership skills and decision-making skills, and to inspire your teams to stay on point and meet your organizational objectives. So until we meet again with another edition of Leadership Perspectives, thank you for watching. Take care and stay safe.